Transnet says it's making progress in clearing up the backlog caused by the floods in KwaZulu-Natal. The state-owned rail and logistics operator says ongoing delays and congestion are making it difficult for businesses to meet their obligations to clients. To unpack the impact of these floods on logistics, road freight and trucking, I'm joined now by Andrew Pike. He's the head of ports, transport and logistics at Bowmans. And I've got to give credit to the initial reporting on that story to Fin24, a story worth following up and taking the conversation forward. Good evening, Mr. Pike. I appreciate your time. So when Transnet says they are making progress in restoring some of their systems and infrastructure that was damaged by the floods, what is your understanding of where things stand closer to port in as far as Bayhead Road, I believe it's called, in Durban, but also in terms of the traffic to and from the port in Durban?
Hi, good evening, and thank you for having me on here. Yes, from what I understand, the terminals themselves are functioning properly within the port, and the port itself is functioning properly. But the big choke point is in the access road to the port. So that is called Bayhead Road. And Bayhead Road lost 2 out of its 4 lanes, the inbound lanes, during the flood, where the road crossed a canal and was washed away. So that immediately halved the amount of access to the port, and the 2 outbound lanes were then made inbound and outbound. So suddenly what was already a constrained road is even more constrained because it was half the volume of the road was offered. Now, the problem with that is that the trucks cannot get to and from the container terminals, and they also have difficulty in accessing the dry bulk and liquid bulk zones within the port. My understanding is that one of the lanes has now been restored, so there are now 3 lanes in operation out of the original 4, but nonetheless there are still the same number of trucks. So you have a choke point there, and where trucks would normally be expected to move, say, 4 or 5 containers in a day or loads, suddenly they're down to 1, which creates a massive problem in terms of the logistics of getting these things to the hinterland or to the port, and subsequent delays. In terms of rail, there was huge damage to rail infrastructure between Durban and Cato Ridge, and our understanding is that 1 lane, 1 rail track will be restored by June, hopefully, and 2 rail tracks restored by September. But nonetheless, you've still got the same number of trucks available, but no rail. So inevitably, you have another huge constraint on the logistics supply chain because of that.
Yeah. And that point that you are making about the damage to the rail infrastructure was highlighted for us and amplified recently with some of the hiccups that were experienced at OR Tambo International Airport around the supply of jet fuel, right? And that has to do with the infrastructure from Transnet that was damaged during the floods, albeit, under the circumstances, now Transnet and AXA and other role players are saying they are working as fast as they can to restore that. But it really was the highlight, was it not?
Yes, absolutely. And I completely accept that they are working as hard as they can in good faith. But there's only so much they can do with infrastructure that is as damaged as it is. But so the fuel supply to aircraft was constrained. But of course, the other problem is that you have a long time or longer time between goods arriving in the port and reaching the hinterland. So where a purchaser or an importer has already paid for his goods when they get on the water, he would expect them to take, let's say, 2 or 3 weeks to reach Durban and another couple of days to reach Gauteng. Now suddenly he's probably got to factor in another 4, 5, 6 days or something like that. So there's a cash flow constraint. There's a constraint in those goods reaching the factories, being manufactured, reaching the distributors or the end customers, and all the way down that supply chain, the delays are costing money. Time is money, as we know, and that's the big issue.
Yeah.
And similarly, on the way out, if you have a thing called stacks in the port where containers have to be in stack within a certain time frame. If you miss a stack, you can miss a ship by 5 days. And so suddenly there's a longer time for your goods to reach, to get shipped and to reach their end customer, and once again, cash flow constraints. And then the truckers themselves, where, they were making, let's pick a figure, 1,000 rand a load, and they were doing 5 loads a day. Suddenly they're doing 1 load a day.
Sure.
They've got, rigs worth millions of rands, which they've got to pay for. But suddenly they're under a huge cash squeeze because they can't deliver the goods. They can't earn what's required to pay off their financing.
So with that backdrop then, please locate the situation for me within what was already a global supply chain crisis, more pronounced in countries like the United States, in my understanding. But what does that do to us then as a country? Because there already was a global supply chain crisis to begin with, and now with the damage that has been done to our infrastructure that we need for freight, rail, and basically bulk movement of goods. What does that do to our economy as well, given the importance that we've already highlighted of these, network industries?
Yeah, so we're just part of a far bigger picture in worldwide terms. And of course, the war in Ukraine has constrained logistics and supplies, but there are all sorts of other factors involved. And where we are already feeling the impact of that, suddenly there's a bigger impact, and it just aggravates the whole position in this country. It's very hard to put any numbers on the economic impact. We can assess, of course, the cost of repairing infrastructure. That's a fairly simple figure, and although even then we've heard varying reports between sort of 12 and 25 billion for infrastructure in KZN. But it's very hard to put a number on the cost of all these delays. But you can be sure that they are quite enormous when you take them all together. And overall, the impact on the economy will probably only be seen, in a year's time or thereabouts, once you start seeing the figures coming back and see what's happened to our GDP. So it's a very difficult situation. I think that the powers that be, Transnet and so on, the roads departments, the government are doing everything they can, but it's absolutely vital that they concentrate all of their energies on unblocking the bottlenecks which have arisen, and to the extent that they can, trying to give some relief to the logistics industry.
Yeah. All right.
But of course, they've got other priorities as well.
Yeah. I've got to thank you for your time, Andrew Pike, who is head of ports, transport and logistics at Bowmans, just giving us a sense there of the issues that Transnet faces and basically the supply chain and logistical issues in our economy.